My name is Jonah Eicher, and with me today is Dr. Tracy Eicher. Apart from being a neurologist and my mom, she has a unique perceptual condition known as synesthesia. Ultimately, synesthesia is a sort of crossover or association between two cognitive or sensory pathways. The most common form of synesthesia, grapheme color synesthesia, as Dr. Eicher has, is an inherent association between words, names, or numbers with specific colors. However, many other types of synesthesia exist, such as the association of certain tastes with visual sensations of colors and/or textures. Dr. Eicher, is there anything you would like to add to my general description of synesthesia?
That's accurate, I guess. But I think that most people have kind of a mix. For instance, I don't just see color; I see texture, images. Kind of, it's fluid, and they're always moving, kind of. So it's just whatever I'm hearing or experiencing, or even certain feelings or whatever. It's always there's visual imagery with it. So to say it's color is accurate, but it's not complete, I think.
Now, prior to this interview, I asked you to do a quick drawing of a common name or word so that you could help kind of show what you perceive. You want to explain that?
So we decided I should do maybe a celebrity, because sometimes if it's someone I already know, then my experiences with them have changed what their name image conjures in my mind. So we decided to do Angelina Jolie, because I obviously have no emotional connection to her. And I did a quick, less than 10-minute drawing of her name and how kind of it comes to me in my mind. This is very hard because, when people say, "Oh, tell me what color my name is," it's an always changing image. So Angelina Jolie has a very red and deep black brown to me, but the front part of the name is more formed, and then it kind of is more dynamic towards the end. So there are changes that keep happening in the name as I'm experiencing it. So to sit down and try to draw it is very difficult, and you can see that the front part of the image is more drawn more specifically, and then it kind of fades over because that part of the name seems to change and float around in my mind, I guess. And that's why it's always difficult for me to talk about synesthesia, because people want to immediately say, "Oh, it's color. What color is my name?" And to say it's color is such an incomplete thing, and then to even say it's one thing is also wrong, because it's always changing. I think it's kind of like if you said, draw a picture of a Santana concert. You could draw Santana, you could draw his guitar, but the concert itself is a dynamic experience. It's a whole thing. And so you can't have one drawing, you know what I mean? You could draw and say, yes, that's a correct image that occurred at a Santana concert, but it wouldn't capture the whole experience. So that's how it is for me to try to explain what color is your name, or what color is the sound of this, or anything that I experience.
So when and how did you notice that your perception was different from others?
I don't know. I grew up as a kid. I knew I was different than my family members, and I just thought they were boring, and I was more interesting. And I didn't really think it was anything that different until maybe I was 10 or 11. And, I would be trying to explain something to my mom, trying to remember somebody's name, or trying to talk to her about somebody that was, for instance, at our church. And I would say to her, the girl that she's kind of a yellow pink. And my mom had no idea what I was trying to say, but I'd always been like that. I'd always said things like that, or I would talk about a man who seemed like ham loaf to me, and she would just think it was, weird, and she would just tell me I was weird. So finally, I tried to explain to her. I was maybe 11 or 12, and I was trying to explain to her how I was trying to think of somebody's name. Um, and she said, nobody else does that. Nobody else thinks of a name and can't think of the name but knows what the color is. And so I guess then I kind of was like, oh, I thought other people did that. But I didn't even know there was a name for it until I think I was in medical school before I knew that it was called synesthesia. Maybe I was in my master's program in psychology at the time when I first heard the word synesthesia, and I read about it, and I was like, oh, I have that. That's what I've always had. So to me, it doesn't seem abnormal, and I'm just actually surprised that everybody doesn't have it. This seems like a normal way of processing information to me.
So many artists and musicians, such as Mozart and Jimi Hendrix, have been suspected of having and benefiting from synesthesia. As an artist yourself, do you think that this condition benefits you in any way?
I think it does. I mean, it's hard to say to what extent, because I can't imagine living 5 minutes of my life without seeing things the way I see them. So it's hard to know how much that influences how I perceive people or how I interact with people. I feel like it might help me read people a little bit better, and it definitely has helped me with. I pursued a career in medicine instead of a career in art, but I still do a lot of things that are artistic, and it definitely helps in all of those things. Anything creative, I wouldn't know how to be creative without that part of me, and it surprises me that not all artists can say they have synesthesia, because I don't know how you could do art without it. I don't know.
So do you think that there are any negative effects, such as sensory overload?
Maybe. I mean, I have migraines, and I get them much more easily when there's just a whole lot of things to process, especially when there's a lot of auditory stimulus, and my brain is, processing that in multiple modalities at once. It's processing the words or the sounds at the same time as images are coming, and it's a little bit of a task to block out the extra, and sometimes it gets a little too much, and I kind of get a migraine or a little bit in that direction, and I have to sit quietly and step aside for a minute.
Now, are there any major theories as to the mechanism behind synesthesia?
I mean, there are theories, I guess, in neurology. The thought process is that, we process visual imagery in the occipital region of the brain, auditory primarily in the temporal lobes, etc. And this is just more where there's crosstalk between the neurons. And it's kind of like as young children grow up, they learn to inhibit certain impulses and urges through their frontal lobes, and they get more control over not connecting emotion with certain things, thoughts and things. I think that people also, as young children, may be prone to synesthesia, and then as they mature, most people just shut down those crosstalk pathways because it's easier and simpler to process sound only as sound and to process images only as images. My theory is that everyone has the capacity for synesthesia. It's just that most people block it by the time they're 5, 6, 7 years old, and there's some of us who just like it and or develop a way to use it to our advantage, or just keep letting it happen and develop it into something that's artistic. My theory is that it's just a natural part of how the brain processing happens when we're very young, and it can be shut down to some extent or not.
Is there anything you would like to add about synesthesia, or say to my sensation and perception class?
I would say that I get interviewed about a lot of things because of my job or different things that I do. And this is probably the hardest thing to be interviewed about. And Jonah's done this to me several times in my life. But it's so hard to talk about because when I try to put it in words, to say, oh, I'm hearing this and I see color, it's just such a simplification that it just doesn't convey what it really is. And I think that the idea of me drawing something was kind of nice because it can begin to at least show and give me a venue for talking about how it's dynamic and changing as I see it and as I think of it. But it's a really hard thing to put into words. I would say though that I'm glad I have synesthesia, and if someone offered to take it away from me, I would never give it up.
All right. Thank you for your time today, Mom.